She served me dinner with a smile, but I had no idea that one bite would lead to a battle for my very life. My son sat across the table, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, while his wife, Sophia, plotted to erase me from my own home after I refused to sign it over to them. In that moment, I realized I was no longer just a mother, I was a target. If you want to hear how I outsmarted them both, make sure you watch till the very end, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story travels. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories. I never thought that a simple dinner at my son's house could turn into a nightmare. The night had started like any other, warm smiles, laughter echoing through the rooms, the aroma of food filling the air. But as I took my first bite, a sudden wave of nausea swept through me. My head spun, and my vision blurred. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to keep my composure. Could it be? Had she done this to me? My daughter-in-law, Sophia, the woman who had smiled so sweetly just moments ago, poisoning me because I refused to sign over my house? The thought was chilling, but every fiber of my being screamed that something was terribly wrong. The house, my home of 35 years, was the battleground. I had been clear and firm, I wasn't giving it up. The pressure had been relentless, Sophia and my son had masked their demands with false kindness, but beneath it was greed and entitlement. I had hoped they would respect my boundaries, but the sudden sickness told me otherwise. I excused myself from the table, my legs trembling as I moved toward the bathroom. The cold towel beneath my feet only heightened the shivers running down my spine. As I sat on the edge of the bathtub, the world seemed to tilt, and I fought the urge to collapse. My mind raced, replaying the evening in fragments, the hurried way Sophia had passed me the plate, the quick glance she had shared with my son. It wasn't paranoia, it was warning signs flashing in front of me. I recalled the months leading up to this moment. Sophia's subtle manipulations, the helpful suggestions that I should consider downsizing, the thinly veiled hints that my house would be better off with them. I had brushed them off at first, unwilling to believe my own family could harbor such intentions. But now, faced with the sharp sting of betrayal, the truth was undeniable. The nausea passed slowly, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. I washed my hands repeatedly, trying to rid myself of the invisible threat. But it wasn't just the food, it was the realization that my son, the boy I had raised and loved, had stood silently while his wife plotted against me. The betrayal cut deeper than any poison could. I returned to the dining room, my expression guarded. Sophia looked up, a flicker of concern, or was it guilt, crossing her features before she masked it with a smile. My son avoided my eyes, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. I forced a smile and said, "I think I need to go home now." They didn't protest. Driving back, the quiet hum of the car felt suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. How had it come to this? A mother poisoned by her own family because she dared to say no. The house where I had built memories, raised my children, and poured my heart into was now the prize in a battle I hadn't even wanted to fight. Once inside my home, I sat down at the kitchen table, the familiar surroundings offering little comfort. I thought about all the times I had opened my doors to them, holidays, birthdays, simple Sunday dinners. I had given freely, trusting that love was enough to protect me. But love had been twisted into something dangerous, something I could no longer ignore. The evening stretched on, and sleep eluded me. Every creak in the house sounded like a warning. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, debating whether to call my sister, Martha. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand the shock and fear that now gripped me. Finally, I dialed. "Martha," I whispered when she answered, my voice trembling. "Something's wrong. I don't think I'm safe. They tried to poison me." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, dear," Martha said softly. "Are you all right? Do you need me to come over?" "Yes, please. I don't want to be alone." Within an hour, Martha was at my door, her presence a balm to my frayed nerves. She sat beside me, took my hand, and listened as I recounted the evening's events. Her eyes filled with concern, but also with determination. "You did the right thing by standing your ground," she said firmly. "But we need to be careful. If they're willing to go this far, who knows what else they might try." Her words echoed in my mind long after she left. I realized that this was no longer just a family dispute, it was a fight for my safety, my dignity, and my home. The trust one had placed in my son and Sophia had been shattered, replaced by a cold, hard reality that I was vulnerable to their schemes. I spent the next few days observing every interaction, every word exchanged. Sophia's smiles no longer felt warm, they were weapons hidden behind a mask. My son's silence was deafening, a betrayal deeper than any act of malice. I knew I couldn't let this continue. But fear lingered, wrapping itself around my heart like a heavy cloak. I questioned myself, was I imagining things? Was my suspicion just paranoia fueled by hurt? Yet, the nausea, the timing, the cold glances, they all pointed to the same conclusion. I recalled the times Sophia had suggested I sign over the house for their security, the gentle but insistent pressure that had grown over the months. I had resisted, insisting that my home was my sanctuary. Now, I understood why. It wasn't just about property, it was about control, about erasing me from the picture. Sitting alone one evening, I examined the plate from that dinner. I looked for clues, anything that might confirm my fears. The food had tasted slightly off, a faint bitterness beneath the flavors. I remembered Sophia's quick movements in the kitchen, the hurried stirring of the sauce. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone again, searching for information on poisoning symptoms and what to do next. The more I read, the more I realized how vulnerable I had been, and how crucial it was to act swiftly. I decided to call my doctor the next day, explaining my symptoms without revealing my suspicions. The doctor recommended tests to rule out any toxins and advised me to keep a close eye on my health. The medical confirmation was a small victory, a step toward uncovering the truth. But the emotional wounds were deeper. How could my son stand by and let this happen? How could the woman I had welcomed into my family turn so cold, so calculating? The questions haunted me, twisting inside like a storm. I began to think about my options, legal steps, securing my finances, protecting my home. But for now, I had to be cautious. I had to gather proof, to watch and wait, to prepare myself for the battle ahead. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence was deafening. The house that once felt safe now seemed filled with shadows. Yet, beneath the fear, a spark of resolve ignited. I was not going to be a victim. I would protect myself, my home, and my dignity. No matter the cost. I whispered into the darkness, "I see you now." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of strength. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a chasm of doubt and danger. I found myself caught in an exhausting dance of vigilance, replaying every detail, every exchange with my son and Sophia. The nausea that had gripped me was only the beginning, a symptom of the deeper poison that had seeped into the very fabric of my family, twisting love into something unrecognizable. I started noticing the signs I'd once brushed aside, the subtle cracks in their facade that now gleamed like warning lights. Sophia's helpful comments about downsizing or the burdens of maintaining an old house weren't casual suggestions, they were calculated moves in a game I hadn't realized I was playing. I remembered how she'd casually mentioned that they could help me out if I ever felt overwhelmed, her tone sweet but her eyes sharp. At the time, I had smiled and thanked her, thinking she was just being kind. Now, I saw the thinly veiled impatience beneath her words, the frustration at my resistance. My son's behavior was more troubling. He had always been quiet, but now his silence was a heavy weight, a wall closing in. I caught glimpses of him exchanging looks with Sophia, furtive, loaded with unspoken plans. There was a coldness in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a detachment that made me feel like a stranger in my own family. I found myself retracing my steps, trying to understand at what point the warmth had turned to ice. I recalled the last few months when they had started visiting more often, always with an undercurrent of expectation. They would linger just a little too long, subtly probing about my finances, my will, the future of my home. I had held firm, but the pressure was relentless, a quiet siege I hadn't fully grasped. One afternoon, I sat in my living room, the sunlight filtering through the curtains casting soft patterns on the floor. I was surrounded by the memories of a lifetime, photographs, keepsakes, the familiar scent of home, but beneath it all, a tension I couldn't shake. It was then that I realized I could no longer ignore the signs. The stakes were too high. I had to be alert, to watch and listen carefully, to protect myself from the storm brewing beneath the surface. I began documenting everything, small details that might seem insignificant but felt vital. The way Sophia's smile would falter when I mentioned the house, the hurried phone calls my son would take when I was nearby, the nervous glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I kept a journal, writing down every interaction, every uneasy feeling, as if weaving a web of evidence that I could cling to when the time came. But the hardest part was the growing distance, the way my son, once my closest companion, had become a ghost in my life. I longed to believe he was caught between loyalty to his wife and love for me, but the truth was a cold shadow hanging over my heart. His refusal to confront Sophia or stand up for me felt like a betrayal sharper than any knife. I found solace in the quiet moments, the ones when I could breathe without fear, when the house felt like mine again, even if only for a little while. I reached out to old friends, neighbors I trusted, subtly probing for support without revealing too much. I needed allies, people who could help me navigate this treacherous path. One evening, I invited my sister, Martha, over again. She was a steady presence, a voice of reason in the chaos. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea as I shared my growing concerns. "I'm not imagining things, Martha," I said, my voice low but steady. "There's something dark beneath their smiles. I can feel it. And I'm afraid it's only going to get worse." Martha nodded, her eyes full of sympathy and resolve. "You're right to be cautious. But you're stronger than they think. We'll figure this out together." Her words were a balm, a reminder that I wasn't alone. We talked late into the night, planning small steps, how I could safeguard my home, how to be more vigilant without alerting Sophia or my son. It was a delicate balance between protecting myself and keeping the peace, but I was determined to find a way. As days turned into weeks, I became increasingly observant, tuning into every word, every gesture. At the next family dinner, I watched Sophia closely. She was careful now, too careful. Her smiles were too rehearsed, her movements measured. I noticed how she avoided my gaze when I mentioned the house, how my son's hand would subtly squeeze hers under the table, a silent pact. I forced myself to engage, to appear unaware, but inside I was gathering strength, building a fortress of resolve. I remembered the times I had stood firm before, when I resisted pressure to sell the house, when I refused to change my will. Those moments weren't just stubbornness, they were declarations of independence, of unwillingness to be erased. One afternoon, as I sorted through old papers in my study, I found a letter Sophia had left carelessly on the kitchen counter during her last visit. It was an innocuous note about a family event, but beneath it, in faint pencil, were numbers and names, details about the house, the mortgage, and what appeared to be plans for a transfer. My heart pounded as I realized this was more than a passing thought, it was a scheme in motion. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my journal. This was the proof I needed, evidence that their desire for my home wasn't just a dream but a calculated plan. I felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. How could they betray me like this? Yet beneath the hurt was a growing clarity. I wasn't powerless. I could fight back. That night, I sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The world seemed unchanged, but inside, everything had shifted. I was no longer the trusting mother or the unsuspecting grandmother. I was a woman on guard, a guardian of her sanctuary. I whispered to the night, "I see you now. And I won't back down." The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and heartbreak. But I was ready. I had to be. For my house, for my dignity, and for the hope that one day, the love I once knew might find its way back through the shadows. I knew I couldn't face this alone any longer. The trust one had once placed so freely in my son and Sophia had been shattered, replaced by a thick fog of suspicion and fear. The nausea I'd felt that night wasn't just a physical reaction, it was a warning, a signal that my family was no longer the safe haven I had believed it to be. It was time to confront the truth head-on, to move from doubt to decisive action. I reached out to Martha again, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I need your help," I said simply. "I need someone to see what I can't. To help me gather proof." She didn't hesitate. The next morning, she arrived at my door, eyes sharp with determination. Together, we began piecing together the fragments of suspicion into something tangible. We went through every interaction, every odd glance, every whispered conversation I'd overheard. Martha's presence was a shield, a reminder that I was no longer isolated. We decided to start quietly, observing their visits with a careful eye. When Sophia and my son arrived that week, I watched them closely, noting their mannerisms and words. Sophia's smiles were too polished, her questions too pointed. I saw her slip notes to my son, who nodded curtly before turning away. Their behavior was a silent agreement, a conspiracy that no longer hid in shadows. One afternoon, while Sophia was distracted in the kitchen, Martha and I slipped into the study. It was a small room, filled with books and papers, a place where I had never imagined betrayal could take root. But there, on the desk, lay a folder just slightly ajar. Inside were documents, bank statements, property papers, and a power of attorney form signed with my name. I stared at the signature in disbelief. I didn't remember signing any such papers. My heart raced as I flipped through the documents. It was clear now, Sophia had maneuvered herself into a position of control, taking steps to transfer my house and manage my finances without my knowledge. The realization hit me like a cold wave, my trust had been weaponized, and I had been blindsided. "We have to do something," I whispered to Martha, my voice trembling but resolute. "This isn't just about the house anymore. It's about my safety and my rights." Martha nodded, her expression grim but steady. "We'll get a lawyer. We'll stop this before it's too late." That evening, I called a trusted attorney recommended by a friend. I explained the situation carefully, holding back the full depth of my fear but making clear that I suspected foul play. The lawyer's voice was calm but urgent. "Mrs. Harris, this power of attorney could give Sophia significant control over your assets. If it was signed under duress or without full understanding, we can challenge it. But we'll need evidence, documentation, witnesses, anything that shows manipulation or coercion." I felt a surge of relief mixed with anxiety. Finally, a path forward. But the road ahead would be difficult. I would have to gather proof, confront the betrayal, and reclaim control over my life. In the days that followed, Martha and I became detectives in our own right. We collected emails, text messages, and receipts. We documented every conversation, every suspicious move. I started keeping a detailed log of interactions, noting Sophia's attempts to isolate me from friends and family, her subtle threats disguised as concern. One evening, as I reviewed the evidence, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. The words were innocent on the surface, but the undertone was chilling. "We should talk soon. It's time to make things easier for everyone." I stared at the screen, a cold dread settling in my stomach. It was a veiled threat, a warning that she knew I was onto her. But I refused to back down. I replied simply, "I'm ready to talk when you are." The next day, I met with the lawyer, who advised caution. "Don't engage directly just yet. Let us build a strong case. We'll protect you." The knowledge that I had legal support bolstered my resolve. I was no longer vulnerable, I was prepared. But the emotional toll was heavy. I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down, the sting of realizing my son had allowed this to happen. The house, the place where I had planned to spend my final years, was slipping through my fingers. Yet, beneath the despair, a fierce determination burned. One afternoon, Martha and I sat in the garden, planning our next steps. The sun warmed my face, but inside I was steel. We talked about alerting other family members, about securing my finances, about installing security measures in the house. "I won't let them win," I said, my voice firm. "They may have underestimated me, but I'm not their victim." Martha smiled, squeezing my hand. "You're stronger than they know." That night, I lay awake, going over every detail, every strategy. I thought about the woman Sophia had become, the smiles hiding schemes, the kindness masking cruelty. I thought about my son, silent and complicit. And I knew that this fight was far from over. But I was ready. I whispered into the darkness, "I see you. And I'm coming for what's mine." For the first time since that dreadful dinner, I felt a surge of hope. Not naive hope, but the kind forged in fire, the hope of a woman who refuses to be broken, who will fight for her home, her dignity, and her life. Every step I took felt like walking a minefield. The betrayal from my son and Sophia had left me shaken, but it also ignited a fierce determination to protect myself and my home. After consulting with the lawyer, I realized that playing defense wasn't enough. I had to become a strategist, to outthink and outmaneuver those who sought to take everything from me. The first thing I did was tighten security around the house. I installed cameras at every entrance, motion sensors in the hallways, and changed all the locks. The process was exhausting but necessary. Each click of the lock turning was a small victory, a barrier between me and the danger lurking so close. I wanted to feel safe again, even if only within these walls. I also took control of my finances. I met with my bank manager to place restrictions on account access, ensuring that no one could withdraw funds without my explicit permission. The bank staff were sympathetic, recognizing the signs of elder financial abuse. It was a relief to have their support, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. Meanwhile, I worked closely with my lawyer to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. We gathered the evidence I had collected, emails, text messages, the forged power of attorney documents, and began building a case to challenge Sophia's control over my assets. Knowing that the law was on my side was empowering, but the emotional weight of the situation remained heavy. I devised a plan that hinged on patience and subtlety. I wouldn't confront them head-on just yet. Instead, I would observe and wait for the right moment to expose their greed and manipulation. I knew their desperation would make them reckless, and that would be my opportunity. One afternoon, I invited a trusted family friend, and, under the pretense of a casual visit, and had always been kind to me, and I sensed she might be able to help if she knew the truth. Over tea, I carefully shared my concerns, choosing my words to avoid alarming Sophia. Or my son if they overheard later. Anne's eyes widened with shock, but her expression quickly settled into one of support. "You have to be careful, but you're doing the right thing. I'll keep an eye out and let you know if I see anything suspicious." Her alliance was a small but meaningful step toward reclaiming control. It was a reminder that even when family turns away, others can stand with you. As the days passed, I stayed alert for any signs of their next move. Sophia's visits became more frequent, her smile strained and uneasy. I noticed her watching me closely, as if trying to gauge my strength. My son remained silent, his eyes avoiding mine, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way he flinched at my questions. One evening, after dinner, Sophia suggested we talk privately. My heart pounded as I followed her into the living room. She sat down, her voice syrupy but firm. "Mom, you're making this difficult. We just want what's best for you, and for all of us. Signing over the house would make things easier. You don't have to worry about anything." I met her gaze steadily. "I appreciate your concern, Sophia. But this house is my home. I'm not ready to give it up." Her smile flickered, revealing a flash of frustration. "You're being stubborn. Don't you see how much we're trying to help? I see exactly what you're doing, I said quietly. But I won't be pressured or manipulated. She stood abruptly, her eyes narrowing. You're making a mistake. I didn't flinch. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. The power of attorney you tried to use without my full consent is no longer valid. I've secured my finances, installed security measures, and informed the authorities. Your attempts to take my home have failed. My son's face betrayed a mixture of guilt and frustration. Mom, we only wanted what was best for you. It wasn't about taking advantage. I shook my head slowly. If you truly cared, you wouldn't have resorted to secrecy and coercion. Love doesn't poison trust or silence a mother's voice. Sophia's eyes flashed with anger, but I held my ground. You underestimated me. You thought quiet compliance meant weakness. But quiet doesn't mean weak. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of my words settling over them. I felt a surge of strength, knowing I had reclaimed my dignity and autonomy. This confrontation was not just about the house, it was about standing up to betrayal and refusing to be a victim. I outlined the consequences they now faced, legal action was underway, and any further attempts to manipulate or intimidate me would be met with firm resistance. This ends here, I said firmly. I will no longer tolerate deceit or disrespect. My son looked away, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Mom. I wish things hadn't come to this. I nodded, accepting his apology but making it clear that forgiveness would take time. Actions speak louder than words. Show me you've changed. Sophia stood abruptly, her posture rigid. You've made your point. But don't think this is over. I met her glare without flinching. It is over, for you. I've taken back control. And from now on, I decide what happens in my life and my home. As they left, I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The battle was far from over, but the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the woman they could manipulate or silence. In the days that followed, I felt a renewed sense of peace. The house, once a battleground, began to feel like a sanctuary again. I surrounded myself with the people who truly cared, friends, neighbors, and family members who had stood by me. I also began the slow process of healing, acknowledging the pain of betrayal while embracing the strength I had discovered within myself. The confrontation had been difficult, but necessary. It marked the moment I reclaimed not just my home, but my identity. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The fear, the doubt, the anger, they were all part of a story I never wanted to tell. But through it all, I had found resilience. I whispered into the flickering shadows, I am not your victim. I am my own woman, and I will always stand strong. The road ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next with courage and grace. I never imagined that reclaiming my life would come with such a heavy cost, but as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I understood something profound. Standing up for myself was not just about property or possessions, it was about dignity, respect, and survival. The days following the confrontation with my son and Sophia were filled with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The family I had known was fractured beyond repair, but I had finally found my voice, my strength. I walked through the rooms of my house, each one holding memories of laughter and love, now tinged with the bittersweet taste of betrayal. The walls that once felt like a sanctuary had become a battleground, but I refused to surrender. This house was my home, and I was its guardian. The silence was my companion, no longer a weight pressing down but a space where I could breathe and heal. I thought about the times I had been quiet, letting others overstep boundaries, hoping that peace meant submission. But quiet had been my shield, my way to survive. Now, it was my armor. I began to rebuild, not just the physical space, but the emotional landscape of my life. I reached out to friends I had neglected, mended old relationships, and found solace in their support. Their kindness reminded me that family is not just blood but those who stand by you when the world turns cold. One afternoon, as I tended to my garden, I felt the sun warm my face and the breeze whisper through the leaves. The earth beneath my fingers was steady and real, a reminder that life continues despite pain and loss. I planted new flowers, small acts of hope and renewal. The legal battles had settled in my favor, my home remained mine, and the power of attorney was revoked. The authorities had taken notice of Sophia's attempts to manipulate and control, and though justice was slow, it was certain. I no longer feared the shadows lurking in my midst. Yet, the greatest victory was within me. I had learned that strength is not loud or boastful, it is quiet, steady, and unwavering. I had stood firm when others faltered, and in doing so, I reclaimed not only my house but my sense of self. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, I sat by the window and reflected on the journey. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I whispered softly, "Quiet doesn't mean weak." And in that quiet, I believed it, with every fiber of my being. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.